Our session, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Professor Yong-Wook Jun of Sungmyung Women's University. I'm the chairperson for this session. So the way that I will preside this session is that we have to be very punctual so that the next session can be prepared on time. So I'll ask each main presenter, Dr. Kim, for 20 minutes. And then the rest, three discussants, you have only 10 minutes for speaking. And then we'll get the questions from the floor later. And then you have another chance of, make a comment. As you see, today's topic is East Asia's economic cooperation and integration. Everybody knows that we are really entering in the age of really uncertainty and turbulence in the global economic environment. On the Europe side, the Brexit issue is a big issue. On the east side of China, we have a trade war between China and the US. And on the North America, they are now entering into the election, issues. So everything looks very much uncertain and very turbulent. The current situation is kind of, very confusing signals. But if you look at the 10 years from now, I think the global economy will grow out of this uncertainty eventually. And if you look at the 10 years from now, Asia will remain the main growth engine for the world economy. The importance of Asia will be more important in the future. And among the Asian countries, the three countries, China, Korea, and Japan, will make a significant contribution and take important roles. As you see, China still remains global manufacturing center. Japan will be the leader in the parts and components. And Korea will still remain as very innovative country for the new industries. So I call three of them three musketeers. You know the musketeers, right? And so I think they will make very important role. And so the cooperation among these three countries will make a significant impact on the prosperity of Asia in particular, but on the also it will have a significant impact on the global economy, in general. So today's topic on the economic cooperation is very important. So after the main presentation, I'll ask the Professor Watanabe to make the Japan case, and then the Yuan Tao on the China case, and then lastly, Professor Ha will make comments on the Korean side, all right? So that's the sequence of rule. And so let me start with the main presentation by Professor Bo-Kyung Kim. And I'll introduce Bo-Kyung Kim just briefly. He's a professor at the Jeju Halla University. He's one of the staff faculty of Jeju Halla University. And he joined the school about 2 years ago, right? And he has a PhD from UCLA in the management side. So he's one of the frequent, guests for our session in the past, years. So please welcome Professor Kim for the main presentation. And the discussion, maybe we can retreat to the that side. We can sit here. Is it okay? We can sit. All right, so we'll sit here. Okay, maybe? Oh, okay, that doesn't matter, yeah. Oh, you can use the podium, all right? Okay, so welcome, Mr. Kim.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your generous introduction to me, and good afternoon, everyone. It is my great pleasure to be here today, and today's topic is Asia's economic cooperation and integration for peace and common prosperity, right? As Chairman John mentioned, just this month, a lot of things are going on, right? China and the US and Brexit in Europe. So we are facing high level of uncertainty and instability. And that demands a higher level of cooperation between countries. So I'm very glad that we are talking about this subject in a timely fashion. So let me get started. So if you see this GDP growth of China, China has achieved phenomenal growth, and it boosts the world economy and also including East Asian country. And one of the main drivers of this GDP growth is world trade. So if you look at this red line, excuse me. If you look at this red line that displays China's increase of the world trade, and you can see the similarity between the GDP growth and the world trade growth, right? So they go up hand in hand. And already around 2011, China surpassed the United States in terms of world trade. And if you look at the export only, then China actually has surpassed the United States earlier than that. And also the gap widened. And it's not just the low-tech industry. If you look at information communication technology, then China's actually surpassed the US at around 23. And this may be because China sources advanced components from other neighboring countries and assemble, so it has a higher price tag for the final output, but at least China is involved in this high-tech industry. So China's economic growth heavily relies on its world trade with other countries. And a bad news now. So just earlier this month, the trade negotiation between China and the United States didn't reach an agreement. And right after that, the US increased the tariff from previous 10% to 25% on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. Also, it covers a wide range of products, about 6,000 Chinese goods. The difference from the previous one is previously the tariffs was imposed mainly on industrial equipment, but now tariffs are also imposed to consumer products. So its effect will be really huge. And if you look at this 1917, that was most favored nation tariffs. So against China, China has the lowest level of tariffs. But as of 2018, it imposed more and more tariffs from 3% to 12%, and just this month up to 18%, and in the future it may go up to 27%. So if you look at the coverage, how many products, how many items are covered and also affected by this tariff, then before 2015, it was 3 or 4%, less than 10%. As of 2017, it increased to 8%. And this year, more than half of items are affected by the tariffs. And if the potential, so as U.S. Trade Representative said, the tariffs will be raised up to 25% on essentially all remaining imports from China. That means in 2019, the coverage will be 96%. So it's huge. So this is 2017. The the left circle displays the export from US to China, and the right circle shows the export from China to the United States. And those items and products are covered by tariffs. And you see the numbers inside, and that shows the tariff amount. So if you add up all the numbers, then the tariffs will be around $50 billion. But from this month, the coverage became widened, so that it actually contains a wide range of products starting this month. And if you look at the bottom line, the product type, it distinguishes final goods and intermediate goods. Final goods is goods consumed by the just consumers or governments, but intermediate input means the China export to industry or companies so that they can use such export products as ingredients or intermediate goods so that they can produce the final goods. So you can see the coverage between the final goods and intermediate inputs are different. So to investigate this phenomenon deeply, I used this World Input-Output database. And actually, if I describe the global value chain, you will clearly understand the construction of the data set. So in 1980s, the GM produced GM Le Mans, and the price tag was $20,000, right? But there are 7 participants to produce this car. So first, Germany counts for $1,500 for design. So when GM sells one car at $20,000 price tag, then Germany accounts for $1,500, and $3,500 goes to Japan for advanced components, and $6,000 goes to South Korea for assembly and etc. So if we know this partnerships contribution or value added by contributors, then we know even though GM may sell this car or exports this car, we know what countries actually contribute this export, and we can nicely decompose such a way. So this data set, if you look at the vertical line, the column, it shows country 1, country 2, country 3. We can apply our GM Le Mans case in this data set. So say the country 1 and at the top, say that is USA, the final producer, and the industry 1 is automobile industry, then the column will describe exactly the global value chain. So country 1 on the left side would be Germany, and among such industry, design industry will produce such intermediate, in this case, a service. And second country will be Japan, and among those industry, the advanced components industry will further contribute their value added, and etc. And all the way down, you can see value added. So final producer also add their value added. Value added doesn't mean profit. So value added covers all the labor costs, capital costs, and also including profit. And then it will finally produce the gross output, which is price value. And we have all these global value chains for every single country and every single industry. So if we use this data set, then we can kind of X-rays of world trade. Who contributes how much? So, but there's also downside. So this data set was released in 2013 and was also released new version in 2016. So I guess this year the new version will come out, but unfortunately it doesn't come out yet. So my data set covers only up to 2014. So this diagram shows the export from China to the US. Due to the nice data set, we can decompose the final use and the intermediate use. If you see the blue line, that's the intermediate use. That means China's export are used by firms or industry as intermediate goods, so that they can assemble them together so they produce final outcomes. And the red ones is the final use, which means it will be consumed by US consumers and or the government. And because we would like to investigate how the tariffs on China affect Japan and Korea too. So in this diagram, you can see Japan and Korea's export to China. And this here you can see also intermediate use as in blue and final use as in red. Notably, both countries' exports accounts for 2/3 of those exports is actually intermediate use. That means if tariffs on China goes into effect, then actually we get quite a negative effect from that, because we export to China not as a final use, but mostly for intermediate use, so that China can assemble and export to other countries and mostly to the US. So this diagram kind of rings a bell. And the data set also allows us to decompose industry by industry. So this is exports from China to the US. And I collect only the manufacturing firms. So the highest level of export is C26, which is computer and electronics. And in contrast to Korea and Japan case, China's exports mostly decomposed to the final use. So China's exports to US is usually mostly consumed by final consumers and government. And we can see the highest is the computer and electronics, and the second highest is textile and clothes here. So if we compare these exports and the added tariffs, we can see some striking issues. So the most highest, the electronics, actually covered by more than half of them are covered by tariffs. And second highest, the clothing is covered 90%. So also, if you look at the product type, the final goods is up to 69% coverage. So China's exports to the US is quite vulnerable from these tariffs. And now I want to decompose China's export in terms of intermediate use and also its value added. So it's each industry, you can see the gray area is sourcing from China itself. So China uses a lot of domestic intermediate goods. And the top yellow part is value added, China added. And between them you see blue, which is Korean intermediate goods, and red is Japanese intermediate goods. So if you look at this, that the portion may look small, but because the absolute amount is huge, so it's quite a huge effect. So if we compare the exports to USA and the intermediate goods to China, we can see that for the electronic goods, for C26 is the most value and value added contributed by Korea and Japan. And so this diagram and also the previous ones indicate that tariffs on China will negatively affect Japan and Korea's effect as an intermediate good to China, because two countries are heavily reliant to China in terms of export. So the news report says China's export to the US in this first quarter actually decreased by 13%. And also Korea's export to China decreased by 17%, which is higher than China's decline itself. But not just indirect effect through China, actually there's a direct competition among these three nations. So three nations compete in the U.S. market. So in this each industry, we can decompose China, Japan, and Korea. So for example, 29, which is motor vehicles, the highest exporter is actually Chinese, and slightly lower than that is Japanese, and Korea follows that. And for the 20 is chemicals, still highest exporter is China. So if tariffs on China goes into effect, then Korea and Japan may get some benefits. So in previous slides with intermediate goods, the tariffs on China negatively affect Korea and Japan. But in this competition in the US market, then we may get benefits. And this is also the previous one was intermediate goods, and this is the final goods. And for the final goods, so for example, for automobile industry, most consumers buy the cars from Japan, right? But previous one, automobile industry may source heavily from China. You can see the difference. So we can continue to compare these two. And the news report also says, actually Japan's export to US increased due to the tariffs on China in this direct competition. And Vietnam is the highest beneficiary of these tariffs. Their export increased by 40%, mainly because a lot of global companies actually moved to Vietnam. And in Korean case, also the export increased by 18%. But if we take overall indirect effect and the direct effect, then actually in Korean case, the export decreased by 0.14%. So that means the overall effect is quite negative. So trade war began, but actually not at a good moment. So ever since the global recession, Chinese growth engine is cooling down, and also the world trade only worsened the situation. And now we are worried about the middle income trap. So the rapidly emerging countries, when they reach the certain level threshold in this slide at $3,000, then suddenly their growth stops. And then they just stay at the low level of wealth or GDP level. Only a few of them overcame such traps. And why this happens, we can explain by production function. So when we produce the output, one way is increased output is driven by increased input. For example, increased labor or increased capital, right? And that's how China has grown its economy. They heavily invest, for example, infrastructure and also other industry, and they drive the outcome. And if you look at this diagram, then China's level of investment is way higher than other two Asian countries. And if you look at GDP growth, do I have 1 minute left? Oh, okay. Oh, I thought when I saw 5, I thought 5 minutes passed. So, okay. So here you can see that the investment actually drives the growth of GDP. And this, this graph shows the sales of excavator, and in around 2017 and 18, the sales went down because Chinese was cautious of their debt piling. And then 2018, last year, because the friction between China and the US went worse and worse, they seems to change their gear and then invest heavily again. So why middle income trap happens? Because they just try to increase the input, but not increase the efficiency or productivity. So to achieve the high level of growth, we have to increase the total factor productivity and this Penn World table provides the productivity level year by year. So one is USA level. So compared to US, China's productivity is still low. Okay, so Chinese resolution or plan is they achieve some high-tech leadership. For example, robotics and aerospace. But bad news again. Right? Just this month, the U.S. banned the export of American technology to Huawei. By the way, Huawei, the name means Chinese success. It's quite symbolic, and it's the #1 Chinese high-tech company. Right? Already Google, Intel, and Qualcomm agreed and stopped their sales. So when you buy Huawei's smartphone, you cannot use Google's Android full version. Right? And because it happened in the context of the trade war, some people argued that, it's a kind of tactics for the trade negotiation. But other people actually argued that actually there is a more fundamental conflict between these two companies. And that's Thursday's trap comes in. So in the old days, Athens with hegemony actually started to concern about Sparta as an emerging challenger. So the historian Thucydides predict that there will be a fundamental conflict between the countries and predicted the battle, and it actually happened. And many people argue that the China and the US attempt to be #1 in terms of high tech and also the economy and also the influence of the world, and they may not be able to avoid such Thucydides trap, and the Huawei case may represent. Okay, so it's actually not a rise, but it's a return of China. And I'll finish with this diagram. Some people show that this diagram, and there is overlapping areas between China, Japan, and Korea, and it can be a threat for those countries. But I see this differently. More overlapping, but also more room to cooperate and collaborate. So if we work hard together, then every century have seen different leaders, and we may achieve the global leader in 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you for keeping time for 20 minutes. And next presentation will be made Professor Yorizumi Watanabe on the Japanese perspective. And as you know, the Professor Watanabe is very renowned, economist in Japan. He used to be a faculty member of Keio University. Now he recently retired and joined the Kensai University of International Studies, but he studied in the Europe, and he's also a very specialist in the economic integration. So now he will talk about the Asian integration, which that Professor Kim very emphasized. 21st century will be East Asian countries' age. So how the integration will work.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a great honor for me to be here, and my special thanks to Hara University and its president. It's indeed a great honor and pleasure for me to be here. This is my third time participation in the Jeju Forum. This time I attend two sessions, one this morning and the other this afternoon. So maybe next year I will have 3 sessions, I don't know. But anyway, I do my best for this one. Now you have my PowerPoint slide. Based on the presentation, excellent presentation done by Dr. Kim, I'd like to talk about maybe the future sort of architecture, how East Asia, particularly those 3 countries, ROK, China, and Japan, to move on despite all those difficulties. And I'd like to share with you some of my idea. So first, I'd like to talk about some of the key issues to talk about. Major sources of uncertainties. One is certainly Mr. Trump's international trade policy that he places protectionism, it seems to be the case, the protectionism at the heart of U.S. Economic policy. And the other is Great Britain now exiting, most probably, from the European Union. And those two are the major sources of uncertainties for the world economy, and Japanese economy for one. And actually, all these Japanese companies are very actively involved in the local production in the United Kingdom with a view to avoiding the imposition of duties by European Union. So if really the Brexit takes place, particularly no deal Brexit takes place, that would be extremely sort of stormy situation for Japan. And already Honda has declared that it has intention to withdraw from the local production in UK. So you see, all of these, it's a real kind of serious problem. So particularly that Mr. Trump's trade policy can be described as bilateralism. And this bilateral deal does not mean necessarily the free trade agreement. If you look at USMCA, which is a revised version of North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, NAFTA was a very good example of free trade agreement. And almost 98% of the goods have been subject to duty-free from the beginning. But USMCA, people call that second version of NAFTA, but which is not at all free trade agreement. As you see already, the free been missing from new naming of USMCA, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. And they set forth kind of ceiling for the number of units of cars being exported from both from Mexico to United States or from Canada to United States. So it's more than managed trade agreement rather than free trade agreement. And now United States has intention to do the same with Japan. And United States called that US JTA, United States-Japan Trade Agreement. But again, Japan is very cautious whether we should go along with this because it seems to be ending up with a kind of managed trade. Particularly the United States wants to set forth certain upper ceiling of units of cars to be exported to United States. The third point here is the kind of United States protectionism using numerical targets and kind of reciprocity reciprocity-led sort of approach to the bilateral trade. And we had a very good, very clear sort of example in the 1980s and 1990s when Japan had very severe US-Japan trade frictions. And I think, the US-China trade frictions also following kind of same path. Now, United States is complaining about this technology advancement of China, and they try to cut off flow of trade, goods and services with China. But I wonder to what extent that could be a good solution to the the modernization of U.S. industries, because they obviously failed in auto industries, despite the fact that Japan performed what we call voluntary export restraints, limiting the limiting the number of Japanese cars export to the United States, the United States car industry did not take this opportunity for further modernizing and replenishing their own industries. And they still have auto industry problems, you see. It was the same story about on the steel industry, shipbuilding, all that in 1970s and 80s. So maybe, you know, the way that the United States presented as a kind of remedy to rationalize the trade of high-tech products by imposing prohibition, quantitative restrictions, I don't think that's really the good way of dealing with the problem. So you see, United States trade policy can be described as a kind of unilateralism, and that goes perfectly against multilateralism that we have altogether committed since the old GATT days, and also since 1995 we have WTO. So what Japan will do? You see, this is a list of Japan's FTA, we call that Economic Partnership Agreement, and those countries' names appearing in red color. We have already concluded our bilateral free trade agreement under the name of Economic Partnership Agreement, EPA. And the most recent one is, as you see, with the European Union. And that came into effect the 1st of February this year. And we have also, in addition to those bilateral EPA, we have TPP 12, TPP 11, although we lost the United States as a partner. But TPP 11 also came into force towards the end of last year. That was 30th December last year. So all that, you see, the Japanese external trade, about roughly 50% of our external trade covered by those preferential trade arrangements. So TPP was really the very important element, but Japan, as you know, was the last participant in the negotiation as a 12th participant in the negotiations. All 11 others have been negotiating since 2010, 2011, but it's only 2013 that Japan participated in the negotiations. Unfortunately, as you know, United States withdrew itself from the TPP, but this is the kind of picture that I would like to share with you. We have bilateral EPAs, and maybe in the subsequent stage, we'd like to move on with two fronts. One is on East Asia. And RCEP, we have already negotiations going on, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or otherwise ASEAN plus 6 framework for the East Asian free trade area. And we have TPP for the Pacific Rim. And at the forum of APEC, we have been discussing about free trade area of Asia Pacific as a kind of ultimate goal. And this is the maybe two sets of avenues. One is RCEP and the other TPP, and that will merge into FTA-AAP at the end of the day. And RCEP is more kind of inclusive sort of approach, having Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar as developing countries, and we'd like to bring them in to the picture of Asian free trade area. And whereas in TPP, it's more rule-oriented approach and high-level market access, high-level rule-making, even discussing about regulatory coherence. And all these could be complementary to each other, RCEP and TPP. And RCEP and TPP, fortunately, Japan has a membership to both. So maybe Japan is expected to play a role, kind of pivotal role, bringing in the results of TPP, proposing to the RCEP members, and some advancement in the RCEP we could bring back to TPP. So I think TPP and RCEP could be complementary to each other. And this could be a kind of the destination that we can share. Yes, thank you very much. You see, those are the three mega regions. One is Europe, centered around EU. We have Americas, NAFTA or USMCA. We have Mercosur in the southern part of Americas, Alianza del Pacifico, Pacific Alliance, comprising Mexico, Chile, Colombia, and Peru. And we have East Asia. And between those three mega regions, we have inter-regional cooperation frameworks such as APEC since 1989. We have ASEM since 1996, and Transatlantic Marketplace since 1995. But after 2010 and beyond, we have more and more kind of intensified inter-regional free trade agreement, or otherwise called mega FTA, such as TPP, such as Japan-EU or Korea-EU FTA, also TTIP, TTIP, has been under negotiation between United States and European Union in the previous US administration of Mr. Obama. So what we have now is TPP with 11 countries emerging from APEC. We have Korea-EU FTA as well as Japan-EU EPA stemming out from ASEM. So I think East Asia is very well situated, located to promote freer trade. And RCEP is maybe next target for us, I mean common target for Japan, China, Korea, to formulate the freer trade, freer investment. And in this way, we could perhaps bring back all those, the higher commitment in the market access, as well as new rules that have been produced in the TPP or Japan-EU, Korea-EU FTA, and also RCEP to bring them back to WTO. I think the major difficulty for the international trading community now is the lack of proper functioning of WTO as a system. You see, the DDA, the Doha Development Agenda, has not been so successful, and that is one of the reasons why we have rather weakened multilateral trading system. So I think East Asia, particularly the China, Korea, and Japan should work together in order to have more solid sort of multilateral trading system. But let us start with RCEP, and let us also start with JCK trilateral FTA. So concluding remarks, TPP 12 as a template for 21st century type trade agreements, TPP 11 to keep momentum for freer trade, and hopefully United States will come back. And RCEP, JCK, updating the production networking in East Asia. Japan-EU EPA came into force this year. That will be a kind of breakwater against US protectionism. And in this way, further enhance the trade multilateralism, multilateralizing those regional trade agreements, and that would be the way to enhance and increase predictability in the international business. So let's work together. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for your very succinct explanation for the direction of future integration in Eastern Asian region. Okay, now let's move to the China case, and then we have Professor Yuan Tao. Originally, this presentation was supposed to be delivered by Professor Hong Tu from Nankai University, but Professor Hong could not come to Korea for some reason at her school. So Professor Yuan Tao kindly replaced this presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Mrs. Tu Hong, she is the Vice Dean of the Financial College of Nankai University, and she have the same guy teacher, the vice president of Nankai University. So we know each other very well. But she cannot come here, so I come here. I have some opinions to share with you. Professor King and Professor Watanabe. Du Bian in Chinese. In fact, I have been in Japan, Tokyo, for 1 year, but I'm very, very sorry I cannot speak Japanese.
No problem.
Okay. Professor King and Professor talk about the China-U.S. trade war, and I understand it is very, very important for world economy. And I said I have been in Tokyo for 1 year, I have been in U.S. for 1 year, and I have been in Korea for almost 3 years. So I understand what the normal people want. Normal people want a better life. Just a better life, yes. Who is the leader? That's not very important. But this world system now is changing. And why there is so important changing? This is also the very important reason for China-U.S. trade war. Professor Kim shared the global value chain. Yes, he said very, very well. And Japan, Korea, China cooperate so well. And generally, we think that Japan have the highest technology, Korea high technology, China technology not high. But recently, recent 10 years, the situation is changing now. For example, Huawei, he mentioned. Huawei has a very, very high technology. That's why U.S. President Trump do not like it. Because, in fact, the U.S. always has the highest technology. We know that GDP per capita of the U.S. more than $50,000, very high. Why? Because the U.S. has the highest technology and always has. But China has a so huge population, and there are so many people. So there are some people, they are very smart and work hard, so they can research some high technology. And from 30 or 20 years, we can see that reality is China can have very high technology and create high technology, not just study from other countries. That is very important. And China has a very huge market. And we know that the technology higher, market very important, because market scale is everything for some industry. For example, computer or something, or 5G industry. Huge market, very important. And China has maybe the hugest market in the world, even huger than US market. That's why President Trump is so angry to Huawei. This is the reason for China-US trade war. And similar with the US-Japan trade war maybe 40 years ago or 50 years ago. I'm very sorry about I mentioned Japan, because 30 years ago or 40 years ago, Japan just say yes to the US. US take some paper to Japan, Japan sign. That's okay. That's why Japan, I think, lost some opportunity for higher industry. That's why Japan's economy stable for this 20 or 30 years, not had the very high growth rate. Some people believe that that's because Japan's population structure, but I don't think so. I think the most important reason for Japan's economy is high technology industry. And now, the US want to copy US-Japan war, trade war, to China-US trade war. But China is not Japan. US or President Trump launched the Sino-US trade war. Yes, thank you. But after more than 1 year later, we find that China has ability to cope with the problems brought from the China-US trade war. Not as some people imagine that if the US exerts extreme pressure to China, China will yield. No, China will not yield. China has so many tools, TOL, tools, to do something, make the US feel not so good. That's why China is not Japan. For example, US give China's exports high tariffs, but Chinese exports, some of Chinese exports from American companies. For example, iPhone made in China, but iPhone, of course, US companies, iPhone, yes. And not just iPhone. In China, there are a lot of American companies. They buy some parts from Korea, buy some components parts from Japan, and assembled in China, and then export to the US. This is a global value chain. But the US just gave the high tariffs to Chinese exports. But I think they should know so many things from China, in fact, is from American companies. This is why China, I think, has the ability to cope with US. The third one is Professor King talk about that if Chinese exports to the U.S. decreased, other countries' exports may be increased to the U.S. But I think, yes, some countries, people talk about that. Maybe we can be better. If China and the U.S. has a trade war, we can export more to the U.S. Yes, but the most important thing is that the global value chain. Even a phone, very small good, so many countries cooperate to make this one. If the global value chain collapses, that's a middleman, I think. This is very important. And if U.S. For a long time to have to give the high tariffs to Chinese exports, maybe China will organize new value chain. Maybe not world value chain, but still a value chain. Some countries, maybe. Maybe with Korea, with Japan. Yes, thank you. Because we very, very close, and we already have so close technological cooperation. And I think in the future, still need this cooperation. So we talk about the China-US trade war, and maybe you will ask me, you believe China has ability to cooperate with this? Why you have this confidence? Because I think China is still in the right direction. The right direction is economic reform and opening up policy. Economic reform, that means from planned economy to market-oriented economy. If you have been to China recently, you can feel that Chinese economy is a very, very market economy. Maybe more market than some European countries. That's why I have confidence. And now Chinese government still believe market-oriented economy is the key for China's growth. This is the first one. Second one is opening up policy. Also, there is China-US or Sino-US trade war. Chinese governments always address that opening up is very, very important and will forever. This is very important. And we can see that the US President Trump always said, oh, we close some because we do not welcome some people. This is not good. But in China, always address opening up is very important. That means even there is not the cooperation between China and the US, there still has Chinese cooperation with other countries. That's very important. So the last, I think China, Japan, and Korea should cooperate. That's very important. Because when we talk about the world trade, world value chain, sometimes we talk about Northeast Asian value chain. The key countries of Northeast countries is China, Korea, Japan. So if these three countries can have better cooperation, I think this is maybe a pressure or maybe something to the US. So even if US want to close something, US can feel some pressure from these free trade countries. That's very important. Thank you.
So much. Okay, we have the final panelist, Professor Tae-young Ha. He's a senior economist in Korea, and he has many hats. He was an economic researcher. He headed Hyundai Research Institute by Hyundai Group, and he was also professor at the Suwon University. Now he's vice chairman of Miko Group in Korea. So he's businessman, he's a professor, and he's also research head. So let's hear something from Dr. Ha.
Thank you so much. Let me talk about the Korean economic growth figure first. Last year, the Korean government, they forecasted this year's our Korean economic growth rate of more than 3%. But last October, they lowered it 2.8%. This year, they lowered it, I think this January, they lowered it 2.7, then 2.6, and quite recently, they lower the KDI, the biggest think tank of Korea, they lower it 2.4%. Some foreign forecast institute like Citibank, they forecast even 2.0 or even 1.9%. So let me ask you, what is the main cause of this Korean economy slowdown? That could be some political environment aggravation, like some rapidly minimum wage increase, or some mandatory labor works limit, 52 hours per week, something like that. But I don't think that is the main cause of the Korean economy's slowdown. Then what is the main cause? I think that's the slowdown of China economy. That's the main reason. Why? Because according to the Hyundai Research Institute forecast research, if the Chinese economy slows down 1%, then Korean economy hit half of that, 0.5%. The Korean economy is structurally the most damaged countries in all over the world from the Chinese influence. So let me focus on this Chinese economy. Well, Chinese economy is by far the most important from our Korean economy's point of view. And as those gentlemen, they already talk about the trade wars. But I want to point out that the China economy has some structural risk as well. Let me talk about it a little bit more detail. Professor Kim, he already pointed out the economic growth is composed by three factors. The first factor, total production, total factor productivity. And the second one, capital. And the later one, labor. But in all those three factors, the Chinese economy has some problems. The first of all, let me say about the intellectual property balance traded increased, and this total factor productivity declines. That means from the Chinese point of view, China import they import many intellectual properties from the overseas, majorly from the United States, and that is the Chinese innovation stars. But the problem is this intellectual property import, their import from the United States, it becomes more difficult and more expensive, as we might know from this trade war, things like that. So that causes Chinese economy slow down. That is the first one. I want to point it out. And the second one is the investment size. As you can see here, from the Chinese economy's point of view, they are reaching the limit of quantitative growth by the capital injection. This is the path the Japanese economy already experienced, and also the Korean economy experienced already. So the Chinese are on this kind of the past track. Well, if you look at the right-hand side figure, the blue line talk about the investment growth rate, and if you can see, it goes up and down. But you can see quite the trend that it goes down. And the black line it's a little bit complicated. We call it incremental capital output ratio. And that means if this incremental capital output ratio goes up, it means the use of the capital becomes inefficient. So it started to goes up and up and up. That means China's economy has more problems to make money by investment. more and more as the time goes on. Let me finally talk about the labor force of the China. The China is by far the largest population countries in all over the world. And the problem is the China becomes old and old. And the older people in China is by far the largest numbers in all of the world. And if you can see here, if you see the left-hand side, the working age population started to shrink over the total population. If you see the red dot numbers, you can see the working age population to total population drops to about the 70%. And if you see the right-hand side, the China, it shows you the China's labor productivity. Because the Chinese labor force becomes older and old, and working age population shrinks, the Chinese labor productivity goes up a little bit. But it's still very, very weak compared to the United States. It only count about 21% of the United States productivity, labor force productivity. So all in all, I want to say that Chinese economy has some structural problems in all those three factors. So according to some forecasting institution, they are saying very rapid Chinese economies slows down in 2020s. Well, this year, China government, they are saying they want to achieve 6.5% economic growth. But according to some conference for the United States Forecast Institution, they are saying the Chinese economy will be slowed down something like 3% in 2020s. That is very, very scary scenario to our Korean economist's point of view. Let me conclude my remarks about that. Thank you.
Okay, Doctor, thank you so much. All right, now we have completed the presentation by four speakers, and now the time is for the floors. So we have about 20 minutes to go, and so I will welcome any questions to the main speakers or three discussants. So anybody has questions, please introduce yourself very briefly and shoot your questions to anybody that you want. Yes, please introduce yourself and then pinpoint who you want to address the questions. Yes, Mr.
My name is Kosuke Takahashi. I'm a Tokyo correspondent of Jane's Defense Weekly, which is a UK military magazine. I have a question to Mr. Professor Yuan. You said China has many tools to cope with the US tariffs and the US, and then China will not yield to the US. And then, so I just wonder, China is now the biggest, largest holder of the US Treasury, US bonds, right? And then in Japan, in 1997, then Prime Minister Ryutaro Hashimoto said, Japan feel like selling the US bonds, something like that he said. And then he gave some sort of pressure to the US. So my question is, will some experts or Chinese government official gonna say, we feel like selling the US bonds or something like that? Do you think this is too provocative or could it be happen? That's it.
We'll take a few more questions. And then I'll give you a chance for the speakers to respond. Any other questions? Yes.
I am Mr. Oplas from Manila. My question is, people talk about why can't we have zero tariff? You know, Trump challenged OIG last year, and you accusing me of protectionism, which have zero tariff, and EU said no. Maybe in Asia, can it be done? So, thank you.
Who you want to ask?
Well,
Professor Watanabe?
Mr. Watanabe or Mr. Kim
Okay.
or Mr. Hai.
All right. Any other questions? All right, then let's start with yes, okay. President Kim of Hala University.
I want to ask a question to Professor Ha. One day I remember a private meeting with a person who later become a presidential, chief economic advisor. That time he was talking about many economic numbers. When we talk about economics, we talk about many numbers. But his wife, whose major was music, told abruptly, you are only talking about numbers, but there's no spirit. No, I'm not saying you or other economists that do not have spirits in, dealing with issues in the manner. But when we look at these numbers and look at some influence factors on giving some influence factors on it, and then I have some not only I, but also many others may think we need to look inward first. Other than looking at Chinese factor or outside factors, we are the result comes the problem arises from inside. That means we may lose a chance to reorganize the labor market, for example. No innovation, many strict regulatory system that prohibits new innovations for new industries, for example, and so they may not be directly reflected to the numbers, but in current times, those factors could be more important, and in that regards, I want to also ask to Mr. Wian, Professor Wian Tao, that is, yes, I don't think, the ideology, socialist regime or democratic regime, that does not make sense too much. But I'm a financial economist. From my point of view, I see we have a clear difference from China and Japan or Korea. There is, yes, a product market, service market, actually the same situation, a free market, basically, market-driven economy. But in terms of finance, which is very important to the formation of political power, we are letting those issues, finance issues, that means, allocating financial resources, the role of allocating financial resources to the market system in Korea and in Japan. But in China, the political regime did not give up, did not leaving this, role to the market. Has a very strict or heavy control on the, allocation of resources. And so that is also related to the regulation. So without such regulatory, aspects, my question is this, can we say cope with the challenges or say the demand for changes properly with say under such a very strict or say such say 융통성이 없는 there is not irrational that lacks of resiliency. And that is my question to Professor Ha and Professor Wian.
Okay, let me first. Yeah. The reason why I talked about the Chinese economy is because I'm not the speaker. I'm a commentator, and also this is the whole East Asia economic. Well, obviously, the biggest problem for our Korean economy is those kind of the inside our own problems, and the key factor is the regulation, as you talked about. Let me put it this way. It is my personal opinion. Right now, the Japanese economy is good, actually. Everybody talks about the Abenomics. Abenomics is not because of that printing money. The essence of the Abenomics is the removal or relaxation of that regulation, pro-business wise. I think that is the very expensive lessons the Japanese get from the lost 2 decades. And from our Koreans' point of view, we don't have that kind of luxurious time or budget. So probably I don't expect this government. We can expect that pro-business regulation, removals, things like that, the very, very rigid bureaucracies and the labor forces, labor unions, and then those kind of things. So that's the very important factor for our Korean economy's threat that we want to face in the future. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Professor Yuan Tao, okay, you have 2 questions on the foreign reserve.
Yeah.
Just trade bills.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you. A lot of people talk about the U.S. national bonds because there are so huge U.S. national debts. The bonds because of debts. For other countries, the national debts maybe is not a good thing. But for the U.S., that's okay. Because U.S. dollar is the world currency. That's very important. And other countries can buy U.S. national bond. U.S. government also can buy. For example, after the economic crisis in 2008, there is a quantity easing. That's very important. And a lot of national bonds to bought, majority bought by U.S. government, not by other countries' government. That's why, my opinion, to sell U.S. national bonds is not a tool for China to cope with U.S. because it's very easy for U.S. government to cope with it. Buy, just buy, that's okay. This is the first question. The second is about the financial market and political power. I have the same opinion with President Kim that economy and political power, they always have some relationship in everywhere in the world, even in the world economy. Today, our economic system, economic institution of the world still contrasted by power, political power. After the World War II, thank you, after the World War II, we know about GATT and then WTO. We know World Bank. We know IMF. All of these international organizations contrasted by political power, mainly U.S. power. So that's why economy always have some political power. This is world economy, and in one country, of course, the same. And every country has its own strategies. Of course, there are some economic strategies, and the economic strategies always have some relationship with political power. I think we can understand it. That's why market economy in U.S. is different from market economy in the European countries. If we know, we talk about that, France, Germany, this market economy different from the U.S. market economy, because every country has its own direction, own strategies. And about China's economy, I want to explain something for Professor. These three structural risks, I think, not so risk. For example, the TFP. If we see the world, all the countries' TFP in the world go down. Not just China. Here is a picture for China, but almost all the countries' TFP in the world go down. And if we see the US TFP, just I think the growth rate per year from 2000 to 2014, annually, averagely, 0.76%. And China's from 2010 to 2014, averagely per year, 1.31%. That means China's TFP growth rate much higher than the US. That means China has less risk than the US. Yeah. And this is, I think, the common thing. Because when this economy became the industrialized economy, TFP will be down. That's a common phenomenon.
Okay, you have almost time.
2 minutes.
1 minute.
Oh, 1 minute, okay. And the second one, investment. I think investment is very, very important, yes, thank you, for every country. But investment, there are different kinds. Some investment become goods. This is from companies' investment. And some investments become service for people or service for companies. For example, high-speed trains or high roads or other things, ports or airports. These investments very, very important for one country, but maybe there is very low benefits because it is not just a business, that is a service for the country's industries. So that's why I do not agree with Professor that Chinese investment is too much and not good. No, very good. And for long-term Chinese development, this investment is very good.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
thank you.
Okay, we have about 30 seconds, but Professor Watanabe, your final say.
Well, thank you. I'd like to just respond to the question raised by a gentleman from Manila about the zero duty thing. Actually, you know, we are heading for zero duty in terms of JCK, CJK, KCJ, trilateral FTA, RCEP, all these free trade agreements are heading for zero duty and no border sort of barriers in regard of trading services as well. But the political reality tells us that it is not easy. But I'm sure that we, you know, through the negotiations, we could have some, you know, reciprocal engagement to bring down our duties and hopefully one day zero duty. And actually, WTO is a kind of worldwide free trade area that you know we could achieve. But WTO is 164 country. You know, membership, so it is difficult. So let us start with JCK, RCEP, TPP, and others. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think it's time to wind up because we have next session waiting. So thank you very much for the audience and all the discussion and presenter. Thank you so much.